Good afternoon. Welcome to Reshaping College Admissions for the 21st Century Mathematics. My name is Robin Brady Ince. I am the Executive Director of the Newark City of Learning Collaborative at Rutgers University, Newark, and also an Associate Professor of Professional Practice in the Urban Education Department. I am really pleased to be able to have the opportunity to moderate this discussion today because for 30 years, notions of access to education, access to higher education, and being able to allow students the opportunity to realize their promise has been near and dear to my heart. And the work that I've done around education advocacy, education policy, education access, starting out my career in admissions at Vassar College, it has all been with an eye toward ensuring equity of opportunity, the tools, and the resources that students, particularly in underserved communities, can leverage to gain access to the promise of education in this country. In our conversation today, we are really focused on ensuring that we have three outcomes from this discussion that you, the participants, can take away. And so we're glad that you're here with us today. We are really focused on what you'll be able to know and what you'll be able to do at the conclusion of this session, centered really around three areas. The first of which is really considering new opportunities for math preparation in high school and new college admissions policies, how those can align to create more equitable pathways to college and career success for students. Our second area is really to address the role of traditional math pathways, especially the race to calculus, and see how that plays in the college admissions process. And then thirdly, it's really an opportunity during this time we're together to learn about expanded high school mathematics course options, such as data science, that are being developed around the country. And so we have three panelists here representing all regions of the country who are going to be here to share with you their perspectives along this particular topic. I'm going to introduce them and give you a brief bio. They'll be introduced in the order that they will present, and then they will begin their presentations. Our first speaker is Mark Cortez. He's the Director of Outreach, Recruitment, and Undergraduate Admissions at the Ohio State University in Columbus, Ohio. Mark has served in higher education for 10 years, and in his current role provides leadership, strategic direction, and guidance and support for a team of 30 professional staff members. As a member of Strengthening Ohio's High School Mathematics Pathways Advisory Council, he is part of a group that was formed in 2019 that is representative of stakeholders focused on equity, communication, and supports surrounding the systems and structures needed to implement new pathways that include what we know are critical Algebra 2 equivalent courses. Prior to his current role, Mark served as the Director of Articulation and Transfer Policy with the Ohio Department of Higher Education. He will be our first speaker, to be followed by Monica Lynn. Monica is the Director of Academic Preparation Policy at University of California, Office of the President. In her role, she oversees curriculum alignment and articulation programs grounded in collaborative system and statewide policymaking to support students' academic preparation for the University of California. Most recently, she's focused on advancing the policy movement behind broadening college prep course offerings and access, especially in high school mathematics and science. As co-chair of the California Mathematics Education Collaborative, she's facilitated a growing network of leaders and providers of professional training for K-16 mathematics, PK-12 school districts, higher ed institutions, state and regional agencies, and professional organizations. And Monica brings more than 20 years of experience to her work. One thing I want to draw our attention to is that thus far we've heard about how our speakers are really standing at the intersection of various multi-sector approaches to ensuring that there are really sound, robust mathematics pathways with an eye toward equity. And not to be outdone, our third speaker after Monica will be Mikal Kurlander. Mikal is a professor of education policy and chair at the School of Education at the University of California, Davis. And her research focuses on the causes and consequences of educational inequality across a diverse set of educational pathways. Mikal serves as faculty director for policy analysis for the California Education, PACE, and is lead researcher for Wheelhouse, the Center for Community College Leadership and Research. She received her doctorate in education from Harvard University in 2005. I had the pleasure of meeting Mikal when I was pursuing my education master's degree there, and I'm thrilled to be in the virtual room with her and Monica and Mark. Without further ado, I'm going to invite Mark to present. He will be showing slides, and so we may need a bit of a transition to get to that. And then he will begin our conversation with a focus on math pathways, particularly with an eye toward the Ohio system. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Robin, and good morning and afternoon from Columbus, Ohio. I hope that this year's NACAT conference has been really one of innovation and renewal for you. This is a conference that I would generally be at in person as well, but this year that was not able to happen. So I am excited to be joining you and my distinguished colleagues in the virtual space today. I hope that also wherever you are joining the session from, that you are well, as it's been a year of challenge, 18 months of challenge for so many of us. As Robin shared in our introductions, I am a member of the Strengthening Ohio's High School Math Pathways Advisory Council. We couldn't come up with a good acronym for that. It's just a mouthful. The council is one part of the work that's occurring in Ohio, and let me share a quick overview of what that work looks like on this screen. You'll see that the role of the Advisory Council and our Architects Committee is to begin bridging high school and post-secondary college and career areas. While the council includes representation from many diverse organizations, like our state school counselor organization and our state parent-teacher organization, the Architects group consists of faculty members from both high school and post-secondary who are really charged with the curriculum design. There are also a number of ad hoc committees who are working on the various fluid pieces that are impacting both the work of the architects and the Advisory Council. In the state of Ohio, this work has become such a critical focus. Currently, students are required to earn 4 credits of math, with one of those credits being Algebra 2 or its equivalent to be eligible to graduate. The Advisory Council and architects are focused on what those equivalent courses are. For most schools in Ohio, the one traditional pathway of Algebra 2 has not been meeting the needs of all students. So we're at an exciting time in the state to be able to begin addressing the need for all students in the state of Ohio. So with an eye on equity, the Advisory Group and the architects have made some important progress. You'll see here that the Advisory Group and architects, in combination with the work groups, are really working in a collaborative and focused way to ensure that what I'm about to show you on the next screen can come to life. On this screen, you'll see that we start to highlight how we anticipate this playing out in these new pathways. This is our proposal, and what has been in the work so far. So you'll see at the top, a student will begin in Algebra 1, and that will lead to geometry and then into one of the pathways. In the pie chart graphic, you'll also see how we have the courses aligned around professions on the right. So if you follow the colors, the color of the pie chart and the color of the chart on the right will align. Those career alignments have come directly from our state's work on a program called the Guaranteed Transfer Pathways. Those are statewide articulated programs to ensure students can transition from a 2-year institution to a 4-year institution seamlessly within those programs. So this is one way that we have taken this model of higher education and started to bridge it with the model of post-secondary. You'll see here that this is not all careers within those pathways, but a good sampling of careers that students and parents have expressed an interest in being able to see. This has also caused a little bit of a hiccup when a student doesn't see a major that's listed there. So we understand that there's more work to be developed in this presentation to students and parents, because really they are looking to see one specific major. And when they're not seeing that, it's causing just a little bit of that hiccup. Also important to note here that these are really designed to allow students to be fluid between the different pathways. So an option for a student is perhaps to take both a quantitative reasoning as well as an Algebra 2 course, or perhaps to take a computer science course and align that with a statistics and probability course. So while there are opportunities for advancement within each of those areas for students, students don't have to stay on one track. On the next slide, we'll talk about how that's impacting some concerns for my admission colleagues who are joining us today. With a closer look at equity, the working groups of all of these areas are really faced with an important areas of focus in the coming year. As one example, how will colleges view students who are taking that fluid pathway between the different areas? We have spent a significant amount of time as an advisory council and architect group defining what rigor of a course means, because we understand that for admission offices, that's an important definition to understand. We know that that's also important for math advising units and for math testing centers to understand. We understand that, so we're putting some work in to see how we can help in that, including a common definition at a very foundational level of how these courses are defined by rigor. We also are preparing for and exploring how these may be viewed between selective institutions, non-selective institutions within the state of Ohio, but also outside the state of Ohio. So while this work is being driven by the Ohio Department of Education and the Ohio Department of Higher Education, which has purview over our public institutions, this does not yet have an impact or a consideration for private institutions in the state of Ohio. And certainly we heard loud and clear from the representatives from our state parent teacher organization that students need to be able to see that flexibility and movement for an out-of-state institution if that's their interest as well. So some of that work continues, and some of those challenges continue to be explored as we are continuing to develop this. Another component to take a quick note on is we understand as institutions are moving between test optional or test required, certainly a different type of conversation in the state of California, that we need to consider how these math pathways may impact ACT and SAT preparation. Again, with many schools making a move or extending to a test optional policy or extending their period for test optional, We know that it's more important now than ever before to ensure we understand this impact. And finally, of course, in the state of Ohio, we are considering how these pathways may impact our state dual credit program called College Credit Plus, where students as early as the 7th grade are able to begin earning college credit. And so we understand that there's also an impact there. And so our working groups are doing all of that good work behind the scenes to try to bring alignment to all of these areas. Now, of course, as I've mentioned, there are some impacts on our admission colleagues. As the admissions representative on this statewide advisory group, I've had the unique opportunity to serve in that liaison role with our state public admission directors. And if you are on the admission side or sit on the admission side of the desk, certainly you can understand some elements that are rising to the top as areas of concern as we explore and implement even some of our pilot courses in this program. So I just want to walk you through what this experience has been like on the admission side for just a moment. First and foremost, the public university admission directors I will share are a very talented and engaged group of folks who at the core of each of their work cares and is concerned about student success. That was heard loud and clear when I had an opportunity to be in front of them sharing the work of the math pathways in the state of Ohio. That introduction was just that. It was a great opportunity to introduce this area to our colleagues and to start hearing any initial questions. While I was able to answer some initial questions, we also felt it was important as an advisory council to allow them some additional time to reflect upon the information and then to provide that in a formal feedback request. That formal request for feedback took quite some time to actually receive feedback on, because as you can imagine, admissions is one portion and one element of the higher education puzzle. So as I mentioned, there are other offices, there are academic affairs offices, there are advising units, there are testing center units who also have a vested interest in understanding this impact. So when that feedback came into us, it varied greatly based off of the size and type of institution, but also on how competitive those institutions were in their admissions review process. After that feedback was received, because it varied so greatly, we identified that perhaps that was an opportunity to have an additional introduction of the program and provide an extended overview of the program. So I was then joined by colleagues from the Ohio Department of Education and the lead architect from one of our public institutions who was leading that group on the design of the courses and the curricula. What was great about that opportunity was that we were able to hear, similarly to what students and parents were sharing in their desire to see a specific pathway by specific major, we were able to hear from our public university admission directors that especially for programs that rely so heavily on math preparation, like engineering programs, it was important to ensure we had examples and highlighted examples of how students may move through the preparation for a program like engineering. Now, we are excited to be hosting next month a symposium for admission directors and academic affairs, provost, academic advising leads, testing center leads, that will bring all of these folks together. And with some intention, we are putting schools in a room together to be able to walk through some of these impacts. That's our next step in this progress. Courses are being piloted right now, and this next step is important because we do anticipate a statewide launch of this program in the 2022-2023 school year. So we are continuing to make that good progress. We are continuing to do the good work because, again, we're understanding the importance of these math pathways and ensuring that all students in the state of Ohio have a pathway through math. Thank you for your time this morning and afternoon. I'm now excited to introduce you to my colleague, Monica.
And as we wait for Monica's slides to come up, I just want to share and thank you, Mark, for giving us the perspective from Ohio that Monica will be speaking about a system-wide policy point of view and highlight in her presentation some of the problems concerning straight and narrow pathways, especially in the race to calculus. She'll be highlighting as well some of the opportunities in new math courses. Monica?
Thank you, Robin, and thank you, Mark. I guess I could say happy Saturday to everybody, whether you're on the West Coast, East Coast, or somewhere in between. I'm Monica Lynn, System-Wide Director of Academic Preparation at the University of California. I appreciate this opportunity to join the conversation at this intersection of PK-12 and higher education, where academic preparation meets college admissions. I've actually been listening and learning over the last several years about how more needs to be done to improve students' math readiness for college in equitable ways. And I come into this space, as Robin was mentioning earlier in our introductions, to be able to share a system and statewide policy perspective, given my role at the University of California Office of the President. So the question that we see posed here is both a challenge and an opportunity involving three distinct but related parts of this change-making cycle. One part has to do with expectations of college readiness as defined by K-12 curriculum standards and curriculum frameworks, academic preparation policy, institutional statements of mathematical competencies or essential quantitative reasonings, and so forth. Another part relates to actual curriculum and the high school math course options students decide to pursue, or as the case may be, are counseled to pursue for college preparation. And in this regard, we need to acknowledge that for some students, these options may be predetermined even before they get to high school, based on how they were tracked during their middle school years. And then at the bottom, you see the third part, which reflects the mathematics subject requirement as outlined in undergraduate admissions policies and reinforced by admissions evaluation practices. This so-called race to calculus is very real indeed if the widely held assumption is that calculus is a student's ticket into college. So in trying to address this question at hand, we could tackle just a specific part in isolation, but any real substantive student-centered change that results in transforming students' math learning experiences is going to require collaboration, alignment, and also shared goals between PK-12 and higher education. In other words, these distinct parts ultimately need to be pieced together to tackle the whole, which can make the change efforts a little bit tricky if there's often this sense within one segment that it's the other segment that needs to change first. I mean, that's of course certainly one way to go about it, but which part of the circle is the beginning? You know, we really need to be all in if we're going to get things rolling. So in reviewing and revising our math course policy from the University of California, which we announced as of October 2020, we had these three goals in mind. First, we wanted to clarify UC's expectations around students' college prep mathematics learning. Second, we wanted to support California high schools in their efforts to design and deliver multiple college prep course options for students. And third, we wanted to encourage a wider range of both higher level and honors level math courses to empower students in their math achievements. So California adopted and implemented new college prep math standards for K-12 in 2014-15. And since then, high schools around our state have been designing new innovative courses that are still grounded in the standards, but they're starting to look different based on the content and based on the approach to skills development. And a prime example of this is an Introduction to Data Science course that was developed out of UCLA, actually, that was initially piloted throughout the greater Los Angeles Unified School District area, huge school district in our state. The growing popularity of this data science course and other quote unquote unfamiliar math courses prompted questions like this one that you see here. Can a student take Algebra 1, geometry, and data science and fulfill University of California's math admission requirement? So just to put us on the same page of shared understanding here, UC requires 3 foundational years of college prep math that includes or integrates topics covered in algebra and geometry. And this can include courses that draw from higher level math, such as trigonometry and statistics. So the UCLA course was the data science course. It was a real case in point because it addressed the relevant math topics, but the question of whether the course would count for admissions purposes just kept coming up. There was clearly a need to explain or reaffirm what UC's expectations for college prep math courses were that would help students to acquire specific skills, to master the subject's content, and also to gain proficiency in quantitative thinking and analysis, which is really at the core of our math requirement. So a work group of UC's mathematics and statistics faculty was then convened in light of the growing questions around what could count for admissions purposes. And this work group reviewed and revised the math policy as needed. They determined that the higher level math courses that would be considered for admissions purposes would want to deepen students' understanding of mathematical concepts, meaning these higher level courses would build upon the prerequisite course content. The courses would also be expected to align substantially with the Common Core Plus standards, which are the standards that are geared more towards higher level mathematics. These courses would be designed for 11th and or 12th grade levels. And because they're geared towards juniors and seniors in high school, these courses would satisfy our admissions requirement as a student's required 3rd course or recommended 4th course in college prep math. So this chart shows you in summary form what the revised criteria mean with respect to how students might fulfill UC's math admissions requirement starting in this 21-22 school year and beyond. They can follow the integrated sequence that you see on the top row of the chart, or the traditional sequence that you see in the middle row. Both of these sequences align with our California Common Core math standards. Or students can follow the newest option in the bottom row, which we have called the expanded math sequence. It's basically named as such to reflect the intent of broadening the options for students. And then in addition, for that expanded math sequence, in addition to either integrated math level 3 or advanced algebra, students can take a course approved in advanced mathematics, in calculus, or in statistics to fulfill our 3-year math requirement. And then in the last column, you can see here that students who go above and beyond the minimum admissions requirement are those who take a 4th year of math at high school, which University of California strongly recommends. Showing support of California high schools' efforts to design and deliver multiple college prep course options for students is both a policy aim for us as well as an internal driver behind any further math policy redefinitions, especially as we see in California the landscape of high school mathematics, it's going to continue to evolve. Following our faculty's explicit approval of an expanded math sequence, My high school articulation team analyzed the math course data from over 2,000 schools that we have on record to see what kinds of math course options are currently available to students now compared to what was available 5 years ago, shortly after our state transitioned to the new Common Core standards. And what these pie charts show is that among California public high schools, the largest percentage, both then and now, is offering courses in the traditional sequence only, that you see in the light blue. But the next largest group in orange, that's the orange slice, are those schools offering a traditional pathway, an integrated pathway, and then an expanded math sequence. So notably from 2016 until now, we're seeing a significant increase in the volume of schools choosing to offer integrated math courses. And that's reflected in both the orange slices of the pie chart as well as the pink. The potential shifts in these kinds of course offerings that schools will develop and implement are in part related to what UC and other higher education institutions are willing to count for admission purposes, given that what often counts for admissions is what counts as a signal of college readiness. My team also did analyses to take stock of the range of courses across the various advanced math discipline categories. And what we see here is that from 2016-17, as well as in the current school year, 21-22, more than half of public high schools in California are offering a range of higher level math courses, which is fantastic. We want to see that blue slice growing though. And the recent updates and policy guidance for advanced math, we're hoping will help the state in pushing the needle even more in support of those schools that, at least in the pie chart you see on the right, who are falling in that 8 to 10% range that we see, that are offering the general advanced math discipline, including statistics or calculus. In other words, these schools in the teal and the yellow slices, they're the ones that are working to expand those course options, but they haven't yet gotten to the point or are necessarily in the position to be offering their students the opportunity to choose from multiple advanced math disciplines, including calculus and statistics. In other words, it's either calculus that's available or statistics that's available, not necessarily both. And then in some cases, perhaps neither is available. Something for us to be working on. As we look ahead and plan for what's next for the sake of our students, we ought to capitalize on the synergy that we have in place in our state. And I think it's nicely captured here in this excerpt from a statement that was recently issued by UC's Board of Admissions and Relations with Schools, which is the faculty board that voted unanimously to approve the math policy changes that the university announced last fall. So let me paraphrase what you see here. We recognize that schools are considering different approaches to mathematics instruction, shifting from traditional course sequences to new courses and sequences with guidance from K-12 policy. Because there are various ways to address the college-ready standards, UC encourages schools to make bold changes in mathematics that support every student's success. What matters most is that students meet college prep standards that align with UC's expectations underlying our math admissions requirement, not that they have completed a specific course sequence. So on that note, our end goal at the University of California is to move beyond straight and narrow math pathways and limited options so that students can have greater choice to determine the most relevant mathematics learning for their educational and career aspirations. We and you as counseling professionals can start by encouraging students, their families, fellow counselors, and other colleagues in the education realm to explore and pursue new and innovative math courses, all the while keeping our college prep expectations high for all students in support of their success. Thank you. I'm going to turn things over to Robin now and move on to our next panelist.
Thank you so much. And so we've heard from Mark about how Ohio pathways or Ohio math pathways relate to recruitment and career trajectories from state policy level and admissions level. Monica has now shared sort of a system-wide policy point of view around what is the race to calculus and how varying math pathways with an eye toward high-level math can make a difference for students. Now we're going to hear from McCall about the role of research, what research questions to keep in mind, and what to really think about while we approach this again with an eye toward equity, and I would add an eye toward access. McCall?
Great, can you see my screen? Great, thank you. Thank you, Robin, and thanks to my fellow panelists. I get to take a step back and remind us of some of the research that is behind all of the great work that Mark and Monica are doing at their institutions, and then bring it back to math. So again, my name is Mikal, and I'm a researcher and faculty member at the School of Education at UC Davis, where I've been exploring pathways into and success in college for quite a long time now. And a lot of what my work is actually well represented in this picture of actually an older elementary school student who's thinking about college quite early. So part of where I want to start is just to remind us that sort of we think that students' choices and course pathways are often a function of their tastes and their abilities, but those tastes and abilities are often constrained by a whole host of opportunity structures. I'm going to be relying on see if I can advance. Can you? Yep, that seemed to work. I'm going to be relying on several reports and academic papers that I'll be able to make available, but just to remind us first that college readiness, college preparation, including math, is a dynamic process between those individual choices students, we think students have in their tastes and beliefs, but that those opportunity structures, and particularly schools, play a really important role. And I think following up on Monica's, a perfect example is we saw some schools are really advancing pathways for students while others are much more constrained. And this is, as she mentioned, and I just want to underscore, happens long before students even get to high school. So what do we know from the broad body of literature? And these buckets could be, have been categorized slightly differently in different places, but what we know that there's sort of 4 key inputs in educational attainment. The first is aspirations and beliefs. Lots of research on motivation theory. We know that motivation plays a really important role, but we also increasingly know that perceptions of belonging also matter. And this is a really important part when it comes to math. And so again, the work I'm going to rely on is from the large body of research from a host of social science fields, but also from work we do both with quantitative data in different states, but also with a lot of qualitative work done with students and counselors and educational leaders. So we know that perception of belonging in math and in the way you see yourself matters for both the choices you make, what you study, where you go to school, and how you do when you get there. Obviously, academic preparation is the single biggest predictor of college success, but what that looked like has really shaped over the last decade, right? So even the use of rigor, you'll see me mention it, you saw Mark actually also problematize it, right? What we think of as academic rigor is really important. So on the one hand, we know that academic rigor in high school preparation is the most important factor for success, but how we measure it and what we think academic rigor looks like in high school matters. It will matter even more now, particularly given less reliance on standardized testing. And so how a course is categorized, whether it's weighted, what the content of that class is gonna, I think, really become important, along with performance, especially in our new admissions landscape. Knowledge and information is another key input. Students receive signals about their college readiness, about their likelihood of success in college early on, from test scores to performance and grades. We saw with the huge uptake of students applying to selective colleges when SAT and ACT were no longer required, is a really important signal of how much the weight of a test score mattered for students' beliefs in themselves. Information, of course, goes beyond just college courses. It's also related to, we know that financial constraints remain a really important barrier for students' college decision-making. And so when we think about educational attainment at large, we think knowledge and information around all key parts of the college pipeline. And then finally, fortitude and resilience. Again, we know success in college, much like success in high school, is complex overlapping competencies. In particular, when we look a lot at students who aren't successful in college, we know that time management, help-seeking behaviors, a whole host of these things matter. And that matters for how we think about the kind of high school experiences students have. What can our high school or secondary schools do to increase students' help-seeking behavior when things get tough? All right, so what I wanted to do is just, again, because of this audience and because of all our work with, I work primarily in California schools. It's a really big, important state. Monica already introduced it some, and so we have some of the best high schools and some of the most challenging high schools in terms of the kind of preparation that they provide students. And so I just wanted to take these 4 buckets and think about the role of what schools can do. So the first is, we know that aspirations and beliefs is really important work from social psychology are malleable, and importantly, that social contexts matter. So this involves establishing a strong college-going culture where aspirations can flourish, where you can see yourself in a field that may require a little bit more math, for example. Providing positive role models who nurture a sense of belonging. Again, belonging is really boomed as a field in terms of understanding why some students find success in schools and some struggle. Nourishing growth mindsets through interventions and explicit instruction, seeing yourself, for example, as a student who can take advanced math courses, and then fostering self-efficacy and academic preparation. So this is, again, a big piece of this is really on those help-seeking behaviors. What about academic preparation, right? So this is, again, lots of research on establishing strong college-going cultures in schools, but that has been a fuzzy concept. What does that look like? And so I think increasingly what we're going to see is that schools that do this are actually kind of the schools that are showing up on Monica's graphs, which are schools that are showing a variety of ways to get to college, right? So basically disrupting some of those constrained opportunities that have existed for so long. So again, ensuring access to rigorous curricular pathways, but really it's diverse curricular pathways, and monitoring equity opportunities. In a large study we did with school districts across California, talking to a variety of superintendents, we really felt those who were most committed to equity were the schools that were regularly assessing the distribution of students across schools by race, ethnicity, and by socioeconomic status. That is, looking at the racial distribution of students enrolled in different math pathways in dual enrollment and in AP courses. So I think I have one data graph to show you. This is from a study that we're now updating, given all of the math innovation happening in the state of California. Monica mentioned one. IDS, there's several others, about a half a dozen really innovative math pathways that attempt to disrupt this race to calculus and to provide students more college preparation math pathways that aren't necessarily dependent on the calculus pathway. And so here what you can see, and it's a lot of data, we're slicing things by 4 dominant racial groups in California: Asians, African Americans, Latinx, and white students, but also by socioeconomic status. So if you just focus, these are seniors course taking. Again, we've updated this recently. And there we are seeing some changes, but overall what you see, if you focus on advanced math or like AP math, the red, or if you look at no math or the light brown, the below algebra 2, you'll see a very consistent pattern that low income students, regardless of their race, are less likely to be in advanced math pathways, more likely to be either not taking math or to take lower levels of math. And we also see important racial disparities regardless of socioeconomic status. And so this is work we're seeing, this is work across the state, but we're also honing in on those school districts that Monica mentioned that have these innovations to see if these alternative pathways have disrupted some of the racial inequities that we've seen in our state and in other parts of the country in math pathways for a long time. All right, so the other thing I just want to mention, especially to this audience, is the complex landscape of coursework, right? So again, wonderful opportunities with these new pathways. We also see a lot more dual enrollment participation in our state, proliferation of career technical ed options, and of course there's AP. And so as this landscape continues to be more and more complex, the role of counseling and the role of sorting of students into these different college preparatory coursework matters a great deal. And so again, focusing on the role of equity here is really important to make sure that we don't see certain pathways for certain types of students, and that all pathways are seen as an equity lever for students. These are just quotes from some of our superintendents that that we spoke to about these different pathways and how they counsel students. So we have in California A to G, which is our college prep course levels, right? So this is the students just to be eligible to enroll in four-year institutions in California. And so our students are graduate with us are by and large graduating A to G. We've had that as part of our expectations for our graduates since 2003. Some of our school districts make this even a standard for high school completion, while others, we continue to see inequalities in just even eligibility for the for four-year institutions. Some school districts have invested most heavily in AP, right? So advanced placement. I will just share that I worry with the without testing, without the use of the SAT or ACT across admissions, we need to pay close attention to AP, that it doesn't become an even bigger role in students' decisions around being competitive for college. So AP, and other weighted classes, including dual enrollment. So just the different pathways and the opening of different pathways are really important for students, but it really means that school districts, counselors, parents, and students will really be paying attention to how these different course options are weighted and matter in their admissions process. And then knowledge and information, again, a big piece is, all of that great work on innovative pathways happening, not just in California, but across other states. How do those get translated down to schools and to students and to counselors, right? So really need to increasing the knowledge base on information about college readiness, applications, admissions, what counts. If I take this stats class, will it matter less? Will I look less attractive to UC than calculus? We need more and more data. As the policies, to keep up with the policies, we need data to look at what happens, what transpires in actual admissions in order to give the best information to counselors around how to advise students. And then finally, I'll just end with the fortitude and resilience. So most promising ways to develop it is through authentic pre-college experience. And that means increasing access to the types of experiences students have, particularly in their junior and senior, that gives them a taste of what college can look like. This could be done through dual enrollment, through advanced placement, and through courses that look like authentic experiences they might have, like IDS, like statistics, like courses that the types of math courses they might experience, the types of expository reading and writing courses that they might experience in college. Best way to do this is to strengthen partnerships between secondary schools and colleges, to require authentic kinds of performance tasks like capstone projects, and to provide additional internships and apprenticeships. The key thing we know from this broad body of research is that students need to see themselves in college, they need to feel like they can be successful. And the best way to do that is to give them authentic experiences that look like what college will look like before they ever start college.
Thank you so much to Mikal, to Monica, and to Mark. What we know, and I'll try this as an English major who pursued math in high school, is that by introducing a different variable within an equation, the formula can be changed. What we're talking about right now is introducing various math pathways with an eye toward rigor to increase equity and access. What we've heard from each of the presenters is that the approach that is taken is one that engages people both in the K-12 and the college admissions areas, and incorporates sort of a state perspective, that the analysis of the impact can really and needs to be monitored and informed by data, and that the intersection and buy-in of the faculty at many of these universities makes a huge difference to ensuring that the expansion of math pathways for high school students will be honored and recognized as rigorous preparation for college once students get into school. One of the things that we're curious about, and something that came up as a question during the session, is really about what the University of California system thinks about the Ohio options. I would expand that, though, to say, as we're all thinking about different approaches that we can take to get toward what I think is a key driver, which is equity, and the increased acquisition of college level and post-secondary credentials to increase the viability of the economic engine that each of our state universities exist in. What do you all think about the different approaches that have been taken, keeping in mind the context of each of the states that you're in and each of the systems that you're in, and how your particular states take multi-sector approaches to solving the problem or informing the race to calculus and various pathways that can be taken for achievement. So what do you all think about each other's models? What questions might you have? I'll open the floor to you.
Thanks, Robin. That's a great question. I mean, I think it's important, as Mark was alluding to in his presentation, to understand that what happens within a state in terms of changing math pathways or offering expanded math pathways, that is important to, that's important work, change-making work that needs to happen across a whole network of institutions. But also important is understanding what changes in your state may have in the broader context, in a national context, because students in our state, whether you're in California or in Ohio or Florida or wherever, they may choose to go to college out of state. And so I think sometimes the blinders can be up and the focus is so intently on what's happening in our local area or within our particular university system. And so I can definitely appreciate learning and knowing more about what is happening on a more national landscape. In terms of what Ohio is doing, my home state, by the way, I think that what Ohio is doing and what's happening in California, not just with the University of California, but with the California State University system, as well as our California Community College system, is that there is a more coordinated effort that's happening to basically disrupt these traditional long-standing math pathways that have been in place for well over 100 years, gearing students down a pathway, or actually, maybe I should say up the pathway, racing up to calculus. That's what we had said at the outset of our panel. And so these various efforts and approaches all share a common goal of not assuming that there is only one and a traditional pathway to follow, but that there are multiple options that should be considered and should be made available to students, again, based on students' educational goals and students' aspirations for future careers.
I would second all of that. Thank you, Monica, for that really thought out response. The piece, Robin, that I would add is that, speaking specifically from the admissions arena right now, we consistently will hear from students very early on in their high school career, this is what I would like to do. How can I get there? What are the best courses that I can take to be prepared, not only for this major, but for admission to your specific university? And that's not all students, but especially students who have a mind of looking at institutions outside of their specific home state. I think they are quite often encouraged by their school counselors to start that homework early, so that if they're a student in the state of Ohio considering a UC school, they have the opportunity to ensure they are going to be the most highly sought after and competitive applicant for that UC institution, and vice versa. If it's a student from California interested in a great school in the state of Ohio. I work at one of them, there are many, but if it happens to be at my institution, we would fully want that student to understand what our requirements are. The piece, however, that speaks to the fluidity of these pathways is connecting that to the understanding that a 10th or 11th grader, or oftentimes even a 12th grader, may not understand what engineering is, or they may not understand what architecture is. And when they get to our institutions, or even through their discovery stage of learning more about those majors or our institutions, they may change. So specifically, ensuring that the courses, regardless of the course, meets the rigor of a student's preparation, is engaging and relevant for that student, which leads them to perhaps perform better inside of the classroom. Those are the key pieces that also have to be considered. Not just if a student's going to be going out of state, do they have this course? If they go out of state and they change their mind, they're still prepared. They have still completed and gone through a rigorous curriculum, and they still have an option for higher education within their home state or outside the state. So I just wanted to make that connection, that regardless of where a student ends up, in state or out of state, I think the main goal, especially of the Ohio model, is to ensure that students are well prepared. And that happens through the redesign that's taking place.
Thank you. McCall, did you want to add anything?
No, I think we can go to the next question. It was mostly about the policy, so we can go on. It's fine.
Okay. So the next question is really about monitoring. I think that, Mark ending on the point that it's really about whether students are prepared, I think makes a difference. And then your point about research, really monitoring the racial distribution and looking at it from various perspectives, I think is important. So in both states, how are you monitoring who has access to these various pathways? And again, how is that informing sort of equity considerations and the way you're shaping those pathways? And how is that information shared with the schools from which the students are coming?
I'll just say a little, and then I think we should turn it back to Mark and Monica on this from a policy-wise conversation. So, I mean, I would just say that I think in California, those innovative math pathways are taking hold, but there's still a small footprint of the dominant kind of calculus. And increasingly we see stats and often AP stats for those students who are really want to show that they're competitive at selective campuses. And so I think this is a little bit like, if you build it, will they come? And that really means that there's got to be, I know there was one question in the larger room that we can't see, but that we're trying to get about will it count all these math pathways? So we tell students to take them, but how will that fare in their admissions? And so I do think that we researchers have an obligation here. The state institutions have an obligation to really inform admissions, especially in the era of holistic review and with the greater reliance on actual courses and course performance, that we take a special focus on these courses and make sure that we're honoring the promise we give students and schools and counselors in advising students to take these pathways, that they count. And so I think there really is an obligation on our part, all of our parts, to make sure that if we're telling students these other pathways will work, you have a shot at the state selective institutions, that we monitor that very closely.
Let me just jump in and say really quickly, for the University of California, the question of monitoring is an important one for us. And we are just starting to dive into that process, looking at the data that we have housed at the University of California System Office around coursework available to students now. And I think the approach we would actually like to take is not just looking ahead to the kinds of new courses that students might be taking and then determining what their admissions status is when they do apply to a UC campus, but actually starting first with a backwards look at the students who've already come to the University of California with the highest level of math being advanced algebra or trigonometry or statistics or data science or calculus, and then seeing what their learning outcomes have been on our campuses in year 1 and year 2, because that will help us understand whether getting to the most rigorous, highest level math for those students, whatever that course may be, if there's still struggle and challenge that's going on, or if students are coming in really solidly prepared to succeed. What I've heard to date has been much more anecdotal. And so, when you hear about stories of struggle of students in a UC intro calc class, most of whom who've taken AP calc, most of whom scored a 4 or 5 on the exam and are still struggling, from my perspective, that raises a whole other set of questions around how can we improve math learning? I mean, the expansion of pathways is not to direct students away from calculus. It's more to reframe the question of what math is most relevant and will best prepare students for college, without just naturally assuming that it's the calculus pathway for all.
And I will quickly add, again, this admissions perspective. We understand in the state of Ohio that not all of our districts are going to be able to offer all of these pathways for students. So some districts may offer one pathway, and another district right next door may offer a separate pathway. But what's important to keep in mind on the admissions side, as we currently do, is that we're evaluating students within the context of their academic offerings. So it's not automatically holding students accountable for a level or type of math that wasn't available in their district. So that's an important component as we consider the equity for students in the admissions process, is ensuring that we are taking that step back, understanding what options student had available to them, and independently being able to make our assessment based off of that specific district, that specific high school, and the pathways that were offered to those students.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate each of your time in joining us and sharing your expertise and perspectives around equity and math access this morning. Yes, or afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm on the East Coast. I want to thank both NACAC for having us here today and Just Equations for inviting us to be part of this panel discussion. Just Equations is an organization that really works from a policy lens to increase equity in math access. We're going to make sure that the slides that were presented today are accessible both on the NACAC website and on the Just Equations website. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to go through all of the questions, but there is one I want to raise as we go forward into the rest of our weekend and continue the work of increasing access, resilience, and completion for students pursuing post-secondary pathways. That question really centers on something I think that is a driver from all of us, which is how to keep students in the center, and then thinking about who is it that gets access to high-level math? Who doesn't and why? And are these various math pathways the most equitable solution? I think what we've heard on this panel is that the answer is yes, but it is going to also entail receptivity and evaluation on the higher ed perspective, supports, resources, and also clarity of pathways on the K-12 perspective. I would also add that it's a conversation that should probably not start in 9th grade. It should not be the first point that we talk about rigorous math. It should not be in 9th grade. It should be earlier. And the work that I do at the Newark City of Learning Collaborative to increase the number of students and people, adults actually, as well in Newark who get access to post-secondary pathways, what we've realized is that access matters, information matters, resources and support matter. And in all of that, rigor and high quality content matters. But I would add to that, the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that aspirations and belief also make a difference. So as we're thinking about who gets access, we also need to think about those students who might be in different pathways within the schools they're in already. our students who might be special education students, and our students who might be pursuing pathways to go into the military or vocational and technical school. What sort of rigorous pathways can they have? Do they have access to it? And do their families have the support and information to make decisions that might scare them, but could bode well for the outcomes that they're looking for their children as they seek to achieve the promise that is there for them? So think about that, keep that in mind. And the last thing I would add is just something that was mentioned earlier about how a student who's taken AP Calculus and then gets into a college class and struggling, what happens there? I would also say aspiration and belief continues to matter once one gets to a college campus. You might have been really, really smart in math, but you might be feeling isolated because you're in a different setting. So we have to continue to keep the holistic aspects of rigor in mind as we also increase various pathways. Again, I thank you. This recording will be posted on the NACAC website. And again, the slides will be available on NACAC and Just Equations websites. And with that, I thank Monica, Mark, and McCall for joining me on this Saturday, and I wish you all a wonderful day. Thank you.